Thank you, Richard. So Dr. Tov is going to be talking about the importance of the textual history of the Hebrew Bible. Dr. Tov is the J.L. Magnes Professor of Bible at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, where he's taught since 1974. And he specializes in the textual criticism of the Hebrew and Greek scripture, as well as in the Qumran Scrolls. So there's no better person to hear from. And I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Tov.
Thank you very much. I don't see my audience, but that's the nature of the beast. I look at the screen of accordance, and I will start talking about textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible, a topic with which I've been dealing, I presume, well, I won't mention how many decades, but quite some decades. And of course, how much can I do in those 60 minutes that I have at my disposal? But I will do my best. I will give some words of introduction. I'll present you with a PowerPoint of some features, and I will show you some other features when we turn to the accordance program. So, what is the textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible? Textual criticism, as you know, is a discipline that is applied to many, I might say all texts of the ancient world, as well as texts of medieval and modern times. It's a necessary component of our treatment of any text, because if you don't know what a text is that you have to comment upon, then you really cannot do so. In our case, things have changed dramatically since 1947-48, at which time we were given the insight of the Dead Sea Scrolls, texts dating from the 3rd pre-Christian century until the 1st and 2nd centuries after Christ. Now, they changed our vision because until then, and maybe to some extent for many people still today, there is, so to speak, only one text of the Bible. That is the text that we call the Masoretic Text. The Masoretic Hebrew text, and all our printed editions present that Masoretic text. And also all our translations present the Masoretic text with this change or with that change. So we live in a world that is dominated by the Masoretic text. Now, the Masoretic text is an excellent text. Not always, but usually it is an excellent text. But it doesn't matter whether that text is an excellent text. We want to know everything. And we do not study the Masoretic text, we study Bible. And when we study the biblical text, we want to know not the text as it is today, or as it was in the Middle Ages. We want to know the text as it was in antiquity, in particular in those centuries for which we have good evidence. Could be better, but still we do have good evidence for the last pre-Christian centuries. And this is because of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I cannot give a full description of all the texts and all the groups of texts that we have. But you know, we have as the major groups, we have the family of the Masoretic texts that probably goes back to a single text. We have the Septuagint, which is not a family, but it's a single text. It is the books of the Greek Bible were translated from manuscripts that happen to be the source for those translators. So that's a second text. And it so happens that the texts from which the Greek Bible was translated is in some cases also visible in scrolls that we found near the Dead Sea. And that's a very happy coincidence. I speak often about coincidences. So, and a third and fourth and fifth text is the Syriac translation and the Targum or Targum in Aramaic and the Pshita translation. Of those three, basically the Vulgate and the Targum most frequently follow the Masoretic Text, and the Pshita a little less, but still. Now, on top of that, we have for the Pentateuch, the Torah, we do have the Samaritan Text, the Samaritan Pentateuch, which differs in quite some details, important details from the Masoretic Text. Now, if you take all those witnesses, we call them, if you take all those witnesses, substantial parts were found near the Dead Sea in all kinds of forms, not in Syriac or not in the form of the Samaritan Pentateuch, not in Greek, but in the form of Hebrew manuscripts. Now, if I now turn to the Hebrew manuscripts that were found near the Dead Sea, and here we have a very interesting revelation in my research of the past 10 years. It has become increasingly clear to me that we have a dichotomy between two groups of texts in the Judean desert, or you might say in ancient Palestine. First, in Qumran, we have a multiplicity of texts, a textual variety. We have a group of texts that is close to the Masoretic text. I call them empty Masoretic text, empty-like. A group of texts. If you want a name, take the Isaiah B scroll, 1Q Isaiah B. Then we have, again, from Qumran, we have a few texts that are very close to the Septuagint, not too many texts. Then we have a group of texts that are very close to the Samaritan Pentateuch. We call them pre-Samaritan. Then we have some texts that are not close to anything. And I have come to name them non-aligned texts, because then neither like the Septuagint or the Masoretic Text or the Samaritan Pentateuch. These are basically the groups that we have. Now, this last group is not a real group, but it's a cluster of texts, because each scribe created a world of himself by adhering to this and changing that reading. Now, as I said, there's a dichotomy in the Judean desert, because on the one hand, we have Qumran, And I believe that the situation in Qumran reflects the situation in ancient Israel as a whole. So in ancient Israel as a whole, we have textual variety. At the same time, there are few islands in ancient Israel that adhere very strictly to what we might call the text from which the Masoretic Text developed. And in those sites in the Judean desert that I mentioned, that's Masada, Murabaat, Nahal Hever, and a few additional ones, we find only that text, which may also be called the Proto-Rabbinic text. Now, it's very complicated, and in the short time at my disposal, I cannot say much more, but the dichotomy also pertains to Tfilin. You have Tfilin at Qumran, so they have a different content, and you have Tfilin in those proto-rabbinic sites. So there is also sociological differences between the two types of text.
Dr. Tov, can I interrupt you just for a second? Are you intending to show your PowerPoint at this point? Because all we're seeing is accordance, and we've had some questions about whether you intend to show your PowerPoint.
Do you want me to show us the background of PowerPoint?
If that's what you're going through. If it's not, then...
No, not yet.
Okay, all right, just making sure.
In a short one. So, but what we do in textual criticism is we review the different readings that we find in the various sources, and we evaluate them. And many scholars are trying to find what they name the original reading. That by itself is a very difficult, what shall we say, game, a very difficult way of playing with the variants, and I'm also guilty of this. Now, at this point, I continue with my PowerPoint because I now want to show you from the different readings. Just a moment. Yes. From the different readings, I want to give you an impression of the differences between the textual witnesses, you might say. So we are playing with those readings. And I want to give you an impression. So I don't, in the very beginning, I don't even talk about variants. What do we call a variant? A variant is any reading, even in the smallest detail, that differs from the Masoretic text. So the Masoretic text is our base for the concept of comparing. And all the details that differ from it are called variants. But not all the differences are necessarily Hebrew variants, because we also have to take into consideration different exegesis, explanations. And that's why I thought it would be nice to start with this picture of Moses, of Michelangelo, on whose head you see two horns. And I'm sure that all of you know this, because why does Moses have two horns? Now, I read from the Hebrew, you can read from the English, because about Moses it is said, "Umoshe lo yada ki karan or panav." He did not know that the skin of his face shone. Now, the Vulgate does not have the explanation shone, like from to shine, but made this derived the word karan from the noun keren, which is horn. So the Vulgate made this Moses into a horned person. And this has become a famous picture of Moses. Is this a different reading? Is this a variant? No, this is exegesis. So this is not a case for textual criticism. Next is a dissertation from 1885. And this person, Kunneke, says, we don't in Germany, we don't call our daughters with the real names that they have, not Chava, that's the name in the Old Testament, Miriam, now this I can't see because, oh, it's, yes, not Chava, Miriam, Hannah, Shoshana, Elisheva, Judith, but we call our daughters in Germany Eva, Maria, Anna, Susanna, Elizabeth, etc. Why does he say? Well, he found that actually we depend much on the Septuagint, and the same is for the whole world. So this is not a variant. This is how the Septuagint translators decided to transliterate. We call that Chava is Ewa, and Miriam became Maria, and Hannah, Anna, etc. So this is not a variant. Iyov has different forms. Moses is in Greek Moises. Now this is already tricky. Yirmiyahu is Jeremiah in English. Jeremias, is this based on the short Hebrew form Yirmiyah? Question mark. In that case, it would be a variant. This word, it's really not Jerusalem. It originally was Jerusalem, as in the Septuagint. It was only provided with the punctuation Jerusalem, because note how difficult it is to put the kamatz and the chirik under the lamed. There is no room. They couldn't add a yud anymore, but the Jerusalem is the form. So there is a difference between Jerusalem and Yerushalayim. This is a variant. Sdom, in the Septuagint, Sodoma. In Qumran, in the Isaiah scroll, it's Sodom, twice O. So what the Septuagint has in common with the Isaiah scroll is the O pattern. It's a different pattern. So this is a variant, a different pattern of the noun. Sodom instead of Sodom. And the same goes for the Septuagint. So your English name Sodom and Gomorrah, they derive from the Septuagint. Actually, basically, they don't really derive from the Septuagint, but through the Latin translations, the Vulgate and the Vetus Latina. This is a different word form. They don't have Amora, but Omra, like in the Isaiah scroll or in chapter 1 of Isaiah. Some small details also. What I'm doing in this PowerPoint, I'm simply giving you, from an enormous amount of possible variants, I'm giving you some examples. For those who know some Hebrew, know Hebrew or much Hebrew, because I realize that among the 500 of my listeners, I have the whole spectrum of Hebrew knowledge. So everyone can pick up a little bit from this. And we have in the Isaiah scroll some very funny spellings. And these are variants. There's variants in small details, spelling variants. In the Isaiah scroll, they write ki, kaf, yod, with kaf, yod, aleph. Very strange. And yatom in the first chapter is written with an internal aleph. We call these differences variants, yatom. And Rosh is spelled in different ways, Resh Aleph Vav Shin, Resh Vav Aleph Shin, and also Resh Vav Shin. Then we have different forms. In the same Isaiah scroll, we have the form Hia instead of He, and Atema instead of Atem, and Hema instead of Heim, etc., the whole paradigm. We also have the Yiktelu form becomes Yiktolu. So we have in this case Yirdofu, again in the Isaiah scroll. Now I come to some other variants in their contexts, both from the Samuel scroll 4Q Sam A, from the first chapter. These are quite well-known variants in this verse. The first example, Vayomer la Elkana Isha, Asiya Tov Be'enaich, Shvi at Gomlech Oto. And then, may the Lord fulfill his word. Okay, there's no doubt that the Samuel scroll here says something different. May the Lord fulfill that which comes out of your mouth. Is this the same, just a different formulation? No, it's not the same. It's different. It's a change. Who changed what? Was MT changed in the Samuel scroll? Was the Samuel scroll changed in MT? Look at the Septuagint. The Septuagint has the same as the scroll. Is it 2 against 1? That's not important in textual criticism. Well, in the New Testament it is, in the Old Testament it is not, because I can also bring other witnesses to the support of the Masoretic Text. It's the intrinsic value of the readings. And we could talk a little bit at length about their comparative value. Very interesting case. It's not a mistake, but clearly one text changed the other. And scholars will have to decide what seems to them to be the direction of the change. In verse 24, there is a mistake. And this is basically for those who know Hebrew. According to the Masoretic Text, Hannah came up with 3 bulls. It may not be a big change, but according to the Septuagint and the Samuel scroll, she came up with 1 bull of 3 years old. Now, I won't play in this presentation with the letters, but you can do it yourself. You can see, and you can also look in my book on textual criticism, because I give that example, that if you look at the letters Befarim Shlosha, it's the exact same as Par Meshulash, but with a different word division, different vocalization. And then if you go back to the context, you'll see that the 3-year-old bull is better, because the next verse talks about the bull. As I say, this is a bouquet of variants. And within that bouquet, I show you here the 4Q Jeremiah D scroll, and look at the bottom of this sample. You will see that the scroll has the shorter readings, Yochanan, whereas the scroll, and the Septuagint, whereas the Masoretic Text has Yochanan, son of Kareach, and it has Nebuzaradan, where the MT has Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards. And it has Gedaliah, son of Achikam, Gedaliah, son of Achikam, son of Shaphan. Now, this is a small fragment, and we don't have much, we don't have more of this kind from Jeremiah. We have other fragments from Jeremiah, but I could talk at length and show that this goes on, the short text of Jeremiah goes on in the Septuagint, and also in a parallel chapter in 2 Kings 25. This is an interesting, let me see. Yes, this is an interesting text. Small scroll, probably of only Deuteronomy 32, where if you look well, if I do this according to the English, you see that the MT has a short text, "O nations, acclaim his people." Sounds very good in English, but the English does not well represent the Hebrew. The Hebrew is much more complicated. The text of the scroll is, "Be glad, O skies, with him." About that we could talk more, but what is more interesting is, "Prostrate to him, all you gods." That's a new element that you also find in the Septuagint. Vishtachavulo kol bnei el. And scholars have been thinking about this difference for quite some time, ever since this little scroll has been found in the cave. And several scholars believe, as I do, that in this case, the difficult text of the scroll and the Septuagint, mentioning all you gods, may not have been desirable by the Masoretic Text that has excised this line by way of censorship, and that's how the present shorter text of the Masoretic Text came about. There's a little bit more to say about it. So far I've given you examples of exegesis, small variance in unimportant matters, and variance in more important matters. This you can see here my color scheme, which may be, well, I can show it here. I have a color scheme which I use for painting the variations in the scrolls, using green as in line 8 for differences in spelling, Moshe with a Vav, using blue as in line 9 for differences in language, Yacholu instead of Yachlu, or Vayim Toku instead of Vayim Taku in line 11, and red for differences in content, including mistakes. Now, why did I choose this example? Because it's exciting. This Vayisa Moshe in verse 8, this is the line after the Song of Moses in Exodus 15. In the previous fragment, you have the Song of Moses. And this is also a song, a fragmentary song of 7 lines, with some words that remind us of the Song of Moses. Look at verse 5, Avdu b'mayim adirim. They went under in great waters. Look at the word geut, which reminds you of the first word of the Song of Moses, ki ga'oga. And it therefore is most likely that this is the song of Miriam. It stands exactly at the place where we are looking for Miriam. So this is a feministic presentation. This is exegesis of the one-line verse in Scripture that gives us the song of Miriam, just as Shiru l'Adonai ki go ga'asus v'rochbo rama bayam. That's the only content of the song of Miriam. But we really don't know what was the real content of the Song of Miriam. So this scribe, or his source, made up a song. Is this still a biblical manuscript? Yes, it's a wild biblical manuscript. I've been thinking about this for many years. At first, I didn't consider this a biblical manuscript. Now I do consider it a biblical manuscript. So this is a major variant. Here, as an interlude, I show you some differences. You might call them variants, but they're really not variants, but it's at the level of variance of internal Masoretic differences. This is a photograph from an edition of Abba Ben David, not available on the internet, and much needed for the study of parallel text in the Bible. And you see very easily how the texts how the details in the text are interchangeable. You see in line 25, I don't know whether I can, no, I can't use my, cursor. You see towards the end of line verse 25, Shamma with an hey at the end, and there you have in the parallel text in Chronicles Shamot. So that would be an interchange between hey and tav. And then you have this word hacharodi, but in the parallel text haharori. So you have multiple interchanges, hey chet and dalet resh, and all the other interchanges you see easily. This is a list of names, the names of David's warriors, only names, and this really displays an enormous amount of textual interchanges, and many of them are mistakes, but often we don't know where the mistake was made, but sometimes we know. In verse 32, Barchumi and Bacharumi in the parallel text, we know that there's a place called Bachurim, and so the correct text is in Chronicles, the incorrect is in Samuel, and basically when I compare these texts, I see that there are many incorrect readings in Samuel, which scholars hold for a text that is often faulty. This is a little small, so you can't see everything. This is, so you just see my, if you have good eyes, you just see the first column of the Isaiah scroll, where I have painted the words according to my system of color coding. Remember what I said about red and green and blue? And you see how interesting that in this scroll there's much blue and green and less red, because the scribe was much influenced by a different spelling. He adhered to a different spelling, and he was much influenced by linguistic changes. This is the first column of the Samuel scroll, 4Q Samuel A, with some of the changes that I mentioned. Please note the enormous difference in colors between this scroll and the Isaiah scroll. There's no blue, well, no, there's no blue, there's one green, so it's the same spelling and language system as the Masoretic text, but all the differences are in content, some of them being mistakes. So you can easily see this. My color system is it's a didactic tool. You can easily see the difference in character between these scrolls. And you see here in line 5, may God fulfill the word that has come from your mouth, the example that I gave earlier. Let me see, do I have one? I have two more, yes. One is, you'll find this also in my book, a very interesting case of interchanges of personal names. In the Bible, in general, you have theophoric names, names with the theophoric element Baal, so like Yerubbaal, something which you would not have expected in the Hebrew Bible, but yes, Baal was part of life of the Israelites, while in empty Samuel, as you see the right column, you will find almost always the doctored names, the changed names, where you have the name Boshet. Boshet means shamed, where the scribe or the editor, whatever way we will call him, changed the original name. And we can tell this, maybe we could have guessed it, but now we can tell it by comparing Samuel with the parallel text in Chronicles. And finally, look at this text, which according to my color coding is only black. So this is a completely Masoretic text with the exclusion of a detail in line 17, which should have been green. This is a black text. So this is one exception for the text found at Qumran, which is Masoretic, and scholars have long ago decided that this text, also because of its date, its late date, did not derive from Qumran itself, but was given a wrong name when the Bedouin thought that they would get more money by presenting scholars with a text from another place like Murabat as a Qumran text, but scholars have decided that this is not a Qumran text. No variance in this text. So now
Dr. Tov, can I interrupt one more time? We're getting some questions asking you to go over your color scheme system again. Some people missed the distinctions of the colors.
Thank you. So I go back to, okay, without even showing. The color, do you see me, or it doesn't matter basically? You hear me?
We still see the 4Q Gen B slide.
Yes, but what I want to say is, let me go to PowerPoint. Yes, this one. Although the letters are small, the second word is Yeshayahu, where there's an interchange where the letter Ayin was forgotten and later on added above the line. All the blue elements, let me stress that the color coding is my invention, and it is only subjective, not objective. It presents my view. I may be wrong. Not only may I be wrong, I also change my view. Over the last few, it's something I invented, and I also wrote a paper about this. All my papers are on Academia, and the paper that I wrote in a volume edited by the late Peter Flint in a French volume there I present also with some samples with colors. Anyway, so the blue are changes by scribes that are based on linguistic changes over the generations. Changes in green, for example, the beginning of line 3, ki, kaf, yod, aleph, are changes in spelling. Spelling, and when we say spelling, we want to say that in all instances, the words are pronounced in the same way. There are those scholars who say that the difference between who and hua is also in spelling, or people use a nicer word, orthography. But I don't do so. Spelling is only when the two words are pronounced in the same way. So green is in spelling. Red is content differences, some of which are pure mistakes, but a mistake creates content differences. Now, in my other examples, but I don't have time to go into, I also have pink. Pink referring to editorial differences. If someone, for example, changes a whole chapter and gives it a different place, or a scroll, a canticle scroll that omits a whole chapter, etc. So those are this in a nutshell is my system.
Thank you for going over that again.
So I now go to the last part of my presentation, which is accordance. And therefore, I go to show, and I say accordance. Yes. I have to wait for my computer. Yes. What do I want to say about accordance? The accordance program has changed my life because I presented my project since 1980 on the Septuagint compared with the Masoretic Text. It was not really available to the whole world because it was in transliteration, and the accordance program made it available in its original languages and also put it in the right format. And it has been improved immensely since that time. But it's not only that accordance provides data that can be used in a beautiful way by textual scholars. Needless to say that I'm now able to prepare my classes in an airplane as my Septuagint classes, as I travel a lot. I don't use in many cases printed editions anymore. You have this frame in which I've prepared before the lecture started. So here you have one of the principles of accordance that is very important for me is the parallel presentation of text. So I always start on the left side with my Hebrew text, the Biblia Hebraica, and this is the Biblia Hebraica with all its details, and I've not found any mistakes between that and the printed Hebrew Hebraica. It has here, do you see my cursor? Please, do you see my cursor?
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute myself, but yes, we do.
Okay, here you see the notes. Now I've made here a parallel pane, the Septuagint of Ralph's. You can also place here the Septuagint of Göttingen with its variants. I've placed here the Vulgate, and let me just omit the Vulgate, and let me add another text, add a parallel. I go to text, and here you see these are all the text that I have, and let me look for, where do I have, I want to have a nice text, I want to have the Pshita, yes, there's the Pshita, makes nice impression, those letters. All these texts are tagged. That means they have behind them a morphological analysis. So if I point to the word Bereshit, the first word, you see in the bottom of the page the analysis. Here you see the bottom of the page, the analysis of the Greek, and here you see the bottom of the page, the analysis of the Syriac. So these elements are very important for me. Now let's do some tricks. I start a new pane. I start let's say Hebrew text. I take the Hebrew Hebraica, a new one, and I add to it the Samaritan Pentateuch. This is a very important text for our study. Samaritan Pentateuch, here. And I promise you a trick. It's not my trick, it's a trick of the program. Now, in old days, I used to sit down for hours and write up the differences between the two texts. So this is the Hebrew text of the Hebrew Bible, and this is the Samaritan Pentateuch. You see already, according to my cursor, the two texts are linked, because the cursor moves in both fields. But you can do more. If I do here compare, it already immediately in blue indicates all the differences, all the pluses and all the minuses. And I'll show this to you in a chapter which is really nice for this purpose. Exod 20, that is the 10 Commandments. And in 10 Commandments, all kinds of things happen in the Samaritan Pentateuch. Well, all the differences are there, including, let's say, here is a matter of a closed paragraph, which it's interesting, of course, because this is the first commandment in the Jewish Bible, but not for the Samaritan Pentateuch. It's not the first commandment. They have a different division. So that's why you see this difference. And all the differences, they have no color coding. But here it's a avot plane, and here avot defective. You see here, interesting, empty spaces, because these commandments are one verse in the Masoretic text. Here, there's three verses in the Masoretic text. 13, lo tirtzach, lo tinav, lo tignov, lo ta'aneh b'recha et shaker. Here, there are all one verse. So that's why the next verses are lacking, because they're one verse in the Samaritan Pentateuch, and the Samaritan Pentateuch has a nice addition here, the Samaritan Pentateuch has a 10th commandment of the Samaritans. So this is nicely inserted here. Now I can do a nice search in this text. In order to do a search on a word, I have to change letters to words. I do a search on a combination, and let me first change this to Pentateuch. So I don't make a search on the whole text, but I make a search on the Pentateuch, because otherwise my results will not be precise. In the Samaritan Pentateuch, you have this very special phrase, the place that the Lord will choose, which is a phrase, a Deuteronomistic phrase. So I look for the word, so it first has to be in Hebrew. So I look for the word makom, and so search, command, and bachar, which means choose. And so the combination of the place here in the red, the place that the Lord will choose, occurs 22 times. And in all those places, if I want to do a research, the Masoretic Text has Yivchar, will choose. I do a research and I see in all those places, the Samaritan Pentateuch has chosen. Look in the introductions to the text and you'll find that this is one of the specialties of the Samaritan Pentateuch. You want to know details, you go to the analysis, and there you see that. But you want to see, you can also see where the hits graph. There you see that this in Deuteronomy, this is a phrase of the book of Deuteronomy. Okay, now I go, I also, in Exodus 20, if I go back to the text, letters, let's say Exodus, I have to first erase this. I go back to Exodus 20, English, no. No, words, not letters. Verses. Exodus 20. One of the nice things also is, one of the nice things, every word on which I click 3 times, I get a dictionary. And this is the major dictionary, Humboldt. That's in the background. Every time that I want to see a commentary, I click on reference tools, commentaries, and I want to see the JPS Torah commentary, and I have it here. This is, for me, an enormous big help in my research. Now, we open a new frame and we say Hebrew texts, Rabbi Castuliatensia, and we show the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they too, at parallel, they too can be added. Dead Sea Scrolls, Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, yes. So here, well, this is not so very exciting, but just you see the possibility that to every text I can add the Dead Sea Scrolls, and everything scrolls in the same sequence. Now, finally, because we have reached our limit, finally, let me just show you how I became connected with accordance. That's because of this module. Let me connect it to this text. Yes, I can connect it to this text. That is reference tools, Semitic text, right. What you see here at the bottom of the page, that is my work. It's now not called Tov anymore, but it's called Tov Pollack because I worked at the second stage in connection with Professor Frank Pollack of Tel Aviv University. It's called CATS, Computer Assisted Tools for Septuagint Studies. And it is a subjective comparison of the Hebrew and the Greek of the Septuagint. It scrolls together, you see, it scrolls together with the two texts above. And as of a few weeks ago, you can do wonderful things with these three texts together with a command called text. But my time is over, and I think this has been enough as by way of a very brief introduction to textual criticism.
Well, Dr. Tov, thank you very much. There are a number of questions. I'll try to sort them out. We had a couple of questions about, I'll start with the easy ones first.
Do I have to change my screen?
No, you can leave it up the way it is. You may want to use accordance to answer some of the questions. We had a couple of questions about English translations. Somebody asked which English translation you would regard as the best translation of the original Hebrew. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yes. Well, it's very hard. I mean, for precise philological work, you can use the translation that occurs in accordance at the bottom of the page. I don't know what the source of that is. Maybe it comes from Westminster, I don't know. I like, if you want a translation in context, I like the JPS translation, Jewish Publication Society, because it's a novel, scholarly enterprise that does not follow the mainstream of all those other translations that are based basically on the King James. And they give some variant readings in the notes. They provide a translation of the Masoretic Text, but it doesn't work out. I showed in something I've written, I show that even they sin against the Masoretic Text and they play with the English, but I like their translation. It's very hard for me to give a recommendation, sir or madam, because I don't know everything. It's not my my field of expertise.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Let's see, there was someone had a question about, are there any good commentaries on books of the Hebrew Bible that use the Septuagint manuscripts as the base text? They write, I'm not strong in Greek and would like to have resources to use when doing research related to the Hebrew Bible.
Well, that's a difficult question. There are two series of commentaries, or maybe three, that I've just written an article, but I don't think it has been published. No, it has not been published yet. The name of that article is the use of the Septuagint in Old Testament commentaries. And there's one series that is published by Brill Publishers. And there's another series, I think it's published by the SBL, but I'm not sure. Then there is 5 commentaries by John Weavers, but only on the Pentateuch. Then there is a series, a good series, in French, La Bible d'Alexandrie. Then there's a good series in German, that's Alte Testament Deutsch. Die Septuaginta Deutsch. And so these are all based on the Septuagint. But then don't forget that there is a modern English translation of the Septuagint. It's called Nets, New English Translation of the Septuagint. It's part of Accordance, and you can have it run together with the text. I can show it. So if I'm here, so I say add a parallel, and first of all, I add Ralph's. Here it's Ralph's, and then I add as a parallel text the nets. Where do we see it? Where do I see it? Yeah, there it is. So here now I have on my screen on the left side the Hebrew text and the Septuagint, and then the Net translation, which is an excellent translation. And that translation is also available freely on the internet. Look for Nets. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
David, before you do ask the next question, I just want to let people know that we have 2 works by Dr. Tov, the Textual Criticism of the Hebrew Bible, 3rd edition, which did take a bit of work on Linda's part and Dr. Tov's part to get rights for the images, but that we do have, and that's on sale, along with the text critical use of the Septuagint in biblical research. Both of those are on sale, and they're both excellent works if you want to know about textual criticism.
All right, so that was the commercial break from Richard. Thank you. And let's see. You had mentioned at one point that 2 witnesses against 1 doesn't matter in the Hebrew text criticism, but it does in the New Testament. Someone asked why that is.
I don't know. I mean, I can tell you what the situation is in our textual criticism, because it's very simple. If you have a reading, let's say, doesn't matter which reading, but it has been copied 5 times, and you have another reading copied once or twice, does not necessarily mean that the reading that was copied 5 times is better than the one copied twice, because much coincidence is involved. Now, in the New Testament, I know they ascribe importance to the number, but I don't know enough about the New Testament in this regard. And no, that's all I can say. I don't know enough.
Okay, yes, there are some schools of thought that focus on the number manuscripts as opposed to other concerns. So, okay. Thank you. A question I had, you had shown an example where you had a reading in the Dead Sea Scrolls that matched a Septuagint reading, but that was missing from the Masoretic text. So I'm just curious, in general, do the Dead Sea Scrolls tend to corroborate the Septuagint more often than the Masoretic text, or the opposite, or what's your opinion on that, or impression on that?
No, there's no rule. There's no rule. I mean, in that particular case, which was 4Q Deuteronomy Q, the Septuagint and that scroll go a little bit together. In 4Q Samuel A, they also go together, but not 100%. And I always say, let's remember that maybe that we don't know which percentage of the scrolls from antiquity is known to us. If only 10% or 30% of the scrolls that were circulating in the 2nd century BCE is known to us, our comparison between these 2 or 3 witnesses is not very meaningful. So it's just, I sometimes use the word playing or guessing. We are just playing or guessing in this regard, and there's no rule. In the Torah, the Septuagint often goes together with the Samaritan Pentateuch, but in secondary readings, in harmonizations, but also often they disagree. But yes, so we should not expect any clear answers on the matter of pedigrees, of family relations.
Okay. This is a question about 2 Samuel 11:1, at the spring of the year when kings go out to battle. But the questioner says, but the Hebrew seems to read messengers or angels and not kings. Also, could the spring/return of the year refer to autumn time rather than spring, because the word Sukkot is mentioned?
So 2 Samuel 11. Okay. ויהי לתשובת השנה לעת צאת מלאכים. Yes, and there we have in the Hebrew, but in the Greek, basileon, which is melachim. Yes, and there's a note of the yes, and many manuscripts have melachim. Yes. So, what is the question?
I guess just so there's, if I'm understanding this right, it's reading malach instead of melech, and so they were asking about if you have an explanation of that, and then also could the spring return of the year refer to autumn instead of spring because Sukkot is mentioned?
Well, the latter part of the question I did not understand, but I would have to go more deeply into this. I will say that I would have to reread a paper by Noam Mizrahi, who in the last 2-3 years devoted a paper to this word and to, I think, one other place. But it would be easy to understand the aleph as a silent aleph, and then we are really, but it's much more complicated, as he showed in his paper, and then it would easily be the word melachim.
Mhm.
The other part I do not know.
Okay. They seem to be indicating that the word Sukkot is mentioned in the verse. I didn't see it, but my Hebrew is not as strong as yours. So, all right, let's see. I'm trying to get to as many of these as I can. Someone else asked about what percentage of the Dead Sea Scrolls do you believe align with the MT? That's sort of similar to the question I had asked.
That's what percentage of the scrolls align with MT?
Mhm.
Well, there are no scrolls of the Dead Sea. There's no scrolls from Qumran that align with MT, what we call the Masoretic medieval text, except for one tefillin, and except for this text that I showed, 4Q Genesis B. There are several scrolls that are like the MT. In the Torah, the largest group, according to my calculation, the largest group in the Torah is a combination of the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Septuagint. So it's not a majority. And in the other books, so that's the post-Pentateuchal books, the largest group is are the texts that I call non-aligned. So that is texts that don't look like anything else. The largest group. In any event, this is Qumran, and this is not the sites outside of Qumran, where, as I said, the Masoretic text is the only text, the sole text, and that is represented in the Bible fragments.
Okay. Does Dr. Tov have any basic rules, that is, canons, for picking the correct reading of a text when choosing among variant readings?
Do I have any rules for which, any canons, rules for picking or choosing between the readings?
Uh-huh.
Okay. That topic is covered by chapter 6 in my book. And what I say there is that I don't trust any of the rules that have been presented. None of the rules is helpful. The only rules that come close to it are the rules of the difficilior, the difficult reading, but also that rule is very difficult and you don't know when to apply it. And a reading that is difficult for you may not be difficult for me, but it definitely is now and then helpful. Here and there, of course, we have harmonization. But basically what I say there is that textual criticism, or the evaluation in textual criticism, is an art. It's a subjective art. So this is different from what you see in some other introductions, and it's definitely different from the New Testament textual criticism, where scholars believe more in textual canons.
Okay, thank you. what is your opinion on what was originally in the Septuagint where Hashem was in the MT?
Okay. The Septuagint now has Kyrios. However, there is one manuscript from Qumran 4Q LXX Leviticus from K4, and that has, instead of, it does not have Kyrios, it has Io. And so it has a short transcription of the name of God, Iao. It has Iao. And scholars, ever since the publication of that text, scholars have been quarreling what to do with that transcription. Weavers, in his text editions of the Septuagint, had to make a decision to put that transcription in his text, it being the original Septuagint, or to put it in the apparatus, it being a later revision. And he decided to put it in the apparatus. I believe that it is probably the original reading, and that Kyrios was inserted at some point, although this cannot be proven. Kyrios, so what you have is Yud He Vav He, a name. The most logical thing for a translator would be to give a transcription of that name. But what you have now instead is the name, the Lord. And that presentation in Judaism, as far as we know, came about only much later as a Krei reading. But we don't have any evidence that it existed already among the Septuagint translators. So I believe it was inserted at a later stage. But I think all views are very hypothetical, including my own. And there are even books on this topic, so complicated it is. And every year I receive, let's say, 2-3 emails. Dear Dr. Tov, what was the original name of God?
All right. Thank you. There's so many good questions, and I'm sorry to everybody if I don't get to yours. I'm trying to pick the sort of broader philosophical questions rather than specific cases. So forgive me if I don't do your question. I figure we've got time for maybe 2 more. Let's see. I've heard that the Ethiopian text tradition represents a Septuagint tradition. Can you speak to that? And if it does, is it a particular Septuagint tradition? Does the Ethiopian text get used in textual criticism?
The Ethiopian translation is one of many translations that we call secondary translations or daughter versions. There is Coptic versions, Armenian, and also Ethiopian. And this is a certain type of Egyptian translation, possibly with second, so it's a translation of the Septuagint. I believe closely related to manuscript B, Vaticanus, and it's used in textual criticism It's not at all interesting for the textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible, but it is, of course, interesting for the textual criticism of the Greek Bible.
Okay, thank you. All right, last question. David Emanuel says, you once said in a class that if you had to reconstruct the Masoretic text most accurately, you would prefer to have the LXX and hatch and red path rather than Hebrew text alone. Do you still have that view?
David Emanuel is a good friend, but let me just understand. Please say it again.
You once said in a class that if you had to reconstruct the Masoretic text, or I guess maybe the original Hebrew text most accurately, you would prefer to have the LXX and the hatch and red path, which, as I understand it, is a Septuagint concordance, correct? Rather than Hebrew text alone. Do you still have that view?
Okay. Thank you. There are no straight answers to this question. I mean, I could say, which text as a Bible scholar do I prefer? I don't prefer any particular one. The Masoretic text is a very good text, and the Septuagint is a very good text. The Septuagint has, interestingly enough, now I know more than when I taught David Emanuel, which may have been 20 years ago. The Septuagint, interestingly enough, reflects quite a few passages and books where scholars believe that the text is more original than the Masoretic text. So we're not talking about small things here and there. We're talking about major differences. Like in the book of Jeremiah, I gave this example of the few words in that particular scroll. But in the book of Jeremiah as a whole, the Septuagint reflects a shorter and differently arranged Hebrew book. Would I prefer that? I don't talk in terms of preference, but that reflects an earlier stage in the development of a book. As a scholar, I would like to know about both stages. Also in Ezekiel, it is an earlier stage. So in short, as a scholar, I like to know about these differences, to learn about them, to review them. I like to change my mind from year to year. And really the most important thing, I think, in textual criticism is to know, so that you have the tools to form yourself an opinion, and that you don't have to depend on the Biblia Hebraica, Stuttgartensia, or for that matter on the Biblia Hebraica Quinta, on their judgment, because you don't always understand what they say. They're not always right in what they're saying. You need to form your own judgment. That's not easy. But you want to build yourself the tools and to see the text in front of you, as you now see in different columns. That helps. And it also helps to create for yourself a different conception of the Bible. Don't see the text as the Masoretic text and variant underneath the text or at the bottom of the page. See the text as parallel text, because that's what the Bible is. The Bible is not one text with variants. The Bible is various parallel texts, and you have to constantly think how to reconstruct earlier stages, how to reconstruct the development of the text. I think this is a beautiful ending for my short talk.
All right, well, thank you very much.
I think that people that don't know much about you should read about you, because it's what a life you've led and how much you have contributed for us to understand the Hebrew text.